Hello, Michael Yan here. Time is 0254 Hong Kong time. It's 2:54 a.m. I'm up this late because I'm working out tech issues, having some problems live streaming, and I want to make sure that everything's working for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday because I do expect more police violence. The weekends are pretty much every weekend since I've been here, since late June, has been pretty violent. And so it's important to get this on video. Now, my audio has been dropping out, so that's why I've moved over to YouTube. And I'm waiting for more people to come on because it takes a while for the email to go out, apparently, so that people can see that it's on. Actually, there it is. I see an email came to me. So let's look. And so, yeah, here we go. So I'll explain a few things. Let's see what the latency is. I'm looking at the screen. Oh, it's only a few seconds. All right. So I'll explain a few things about this sort of war. I've tried several times tonight. Then we get audio kept dropping out. So if the audio drops out, please let me know in a comment immediately because that's important for me to know. If the audio drops out, I'm going to have to buy another phone tomorrow on Android because I'm using Apple and the audio keeps dropping out the last few days on 3 different phones. All right. It looks like there's only 5 people aboard right now because I don't get a lot of feed out here because I never use YouTube, practically ever use it, so people don't actually know we're on. So we'll just make this private. Unless you've got comments, I'll answer those while we wait for more people to join. Let's see. Well, let's see. Audio is dropping out on the iOS Facebook app after 700 seconds or 11 minutes 40 seconds. Did you see that more than once? Did you time it more than once? I didn't time it. Audio is fine for me. It's fine now, James, but let's see it at the 11-minute mark, 11 or 12-minute mark. And that's really weird why it's doing that. And okay, now it's done it on 3 separate phones. Thanks, Web Lurker. I like that, Web Lurker. It's done that on 3 different phones. I didn't time it. Actually, I was curious about timing it. By the way, another symptom is that after I was uploading the videos to Facebook, and see, it happened twice during your live streams with Robert the other day. Yeah, it did. And then it happened before that, the day before as well. And I was curious about the timing. One of the interesting things is that once I shut off the live feed on Facebook, normally you get an option to save the video. But in that case, in none of those cases did I have an option to save the video. So anyway, there's 6 people on. So if you would like, we'll get started with our own private little party here. And I can look at comments, especially when there's only 6. So let's see here. Actually interesting because I see comments popped up on my, oh, I think I know what it is, on my phone. Do you think the insurgency in HK has a strong chance of sparking related insurgencies in mainland China? Eric asked. It could. I mean, obviously they try to block. That's a question that a lot of people are asking. I mean, it's a very good question, solid question. Nobody knows the answer. Certainly, it's inspiring. For instance, Taiwanese are pretty courageous to begin with, but it's inspiring them, and it's inspiring some others we can see. For instance, I mean, you know, courage is infectious, just as cowardice is infectious. And that's why terrorists try to plant the seeds of terror and, you know, to try to tap into that psychological reality. And the Hong Kongers have shown so much courage. Let's see, sorry, Web Lurker said, I meant that, but they've shown so much courage that, you know, it could actually spread. It certainly spread across Hong Kong. And it's gotten Americans jumping on airplanes coming over here because I get messages from quite a few of them. Let's see. All right, we'll get started here. Web Lurker left a message. I saw him leave it, and now it's not showing on my computer. But let me see if I can see it on my... No, I can't see it on the phone either. You left a message, but it popped up and then disappeared, weirdly. And I don't see it on my computer. So whatever you said, I'm sorry, I missed it. All right, let's get started. And why don't I see your message? But Uh, I'll talk about. Oh, okay, sorry, I meant the audio dropped out at 11 minutes 40 seconds during both Robert live streams and during the Montauk live stream. Okay, that's interesting. Huh. All right. Um, so weird. Something's going on. Remember now, it did it. Remember what I said? It did it on 3 different phones. So I'm curious if it did. It did it on an iPhone um, XR, and then it did it on an XS, and now this is an iPhone 11, and it's Max 11 Max Pro or Pro Max or whatever, and it's done it on this one. So, but it could be after the 13.1.2 iOS update because it coincides with that. But that's could be coincidental. All right, let's get rolling. So, I'll explain why I came here to Hong Kong and didn't go to so many other conflicts and wars that are going on right now, because there's always conflicts and wars. I mean, and I don't run off to hardly any, actually. Are you still using a Wi-Fi SIM card bonding device? Now, that might be the problem. No, that's a good question, but I've tried all combinations of that. I've tried it with it turned completely off. I've tried it with bonding. I've tried it with only the Wi-Fi. I've tried it with other Wi-Fi that's not my M1 Nighthawk hotspot. I've tried it only with the SIM cards. So I've tried it in many combinations, and it's just fails no matter what. But it could be. We'll see. Let's see if it fails. I mean, we're 6 minutes 50 seconds into it at this point. Let's see if it fails before 12 minutes. So I better get talking. Let's see if it, all right. Unless you want to talk about tech stuff, which is kind of boring. But, it's not boring if it doesn't work. It is boring if it does work, though. To understand these sorts of conflicts, like these low intensity conflicts, this one is very, very low intensity, but it's building. I use the metaphor of the mouse and the elephant. If you can understand a mouse, how it works, little mouse feet. If you can understand how the mouse looks more like a tick, I guess. If you can understand how a mouse works, it has a heart and a nervous system and uses oxygen and those sorts of things, then you can understand a great deal about an elephant. That's an elephant, okay? So you can understand something, a great deal about the elephant. Of course, they have different behaviors, they have different diets. I suppose they have different diets. I don't know that to be true. But they maybe live in different parts of the world or whatever, but they have a lot of similarities. And it's similar with wars. With this sort of war, with the low-intensity conflicts, they will share, if you can study just a few of them, say 5, then you can understand, you can extrapolate from that and start to get a handle on the next one that you see even before you see it. At least you'll have some idea about it. You're like, hey, this thing's got a heart somewhere. Where's the heart? You know what I mean? You'll have at least a basic understanding. But there'll be obviously always big differences too. But now, why did I come here? Let's go on the continuum of what happens in some of these low intensity conflicts. I'll start this again. We never have gotten to the insurgency part because audio always gets cuts off. So it's we're almost at the 9-minute mark. So let's see if we make it to 12. Now on the continuum here, every protests are normal in free societies. So this is our amplitudes and frequency of protest, right? There's always protests in the United States, and they're not usually very big. Sometimes they are. If something big happens, like a war, like the Iraq War, I was in a protest in San Francisco because I was out there actually out there actually infiltrating a cult. And so I stopped and took some time off and went to and just looked at some, not as a participant, but I was looking at some of the protests. There was one in San Francisco with about 200,000 people, which is trivial compared to the 2 million that have showed up here in Hong Kong. But the day of that 200,000 protest, that was an anti-Iraq war protest. There were protests all around the country and all around the world. So they say it was one of the biggest protests in the world, whatever. But that was a case of general civil unrest about the war, actually, but it didn't go into any insurgency that took hold. But so the amplitude was, enormous. But it was generally about the war. But when you really went to those protests, I went to a few. You would see people there that were really there for Save the Whales or legalizing marijuana or something. There was a lot of people there with different objectives, which is something that you often see in these protests. If let's see, are you using a bonding device now? Yes, I am. Okay, tell me if the audio drops out, please, because we're about to hit that mark in about a minute and 30 seconds. And if it doesn't, then I've learned something very important. And so when you get into these protests, are generally about something specific, though. They'll be about as I've mentioned before, teacher pay or truck driver something, or some specific thing like malpractice lawsuits for attorneys or something. So the people that are protesting tend to come from one group, like teachers, let's say, right? So those are the normal day-to-day background noise protests that you get. And in a healthy society, we've always got those going on. And insofar as looking at a war, those can generally safely be ignored if you're war spotting, which is what I was doing. And so you fade into it's a gradual fade. You fade into something called general civil unrest. And general civil unrest, call it GCU, that's where there's a lot of other types of people protesting, not just teachers, not just lawyers, not just truck drivers, but people that are across the spectrum in often economically or religious. Different religions might join the same protest. You can really cross a lot of boundaries when you get into general civil unrest. Now I wonder if you can still hear me. Can you hear me? I'll write this because we've passed the 12-minute mark. You hear me? Audio is great, Keith says. Okay. And Eric says, good. Okay. And Yuen Kipton, cool name. It sounds almost like a Burmese name. Could be Thai. All right. Thanks, Web Lurker and everybody. So when you get into general civil unrest, the frequency of the protest can increase, but the amplitude can increase dramatically, right? And so, because now you've got a wide swath of people that are protesting, right? It could be all across the spectrum. And that's what we got in early June. In Hong Kong, there was a protest with about 1 million people. And after that, another one followed up with about 2 million people. In the first one, they got tear gassed and hit with rubber bullets and all that. They didn't back off. They got non-Newtonian about it, and they got stiff. And they, not just stiff, but they bounced back harder, right? And so then it really took off, right? And so then you started getting these, really big protests, which I've been in a lot of now, right? It'll be like this, something, and it's a huge protest, right? Nothing like back here. And when you go into the protest and you see what the people, I'll cross this out so people don't get confused. So in the general civil unrest, there's only 7.5 million people in Hong Kong, approximately 7.5 million. And it was estimated that in one of these protests, a couple million people came out. And others, there's been many hundreds of thousands. I've been in them. Another one or two, is probably way over 1 million. Nobody knows. These things are very difficult to estimate. But let's just say they were gigantic, because I was here for most of the big ones. I missed 2 big ones, and that's when I came. So what I've been watching China for years, and of course I've studied this sort of war for years, and I've spent years in these sorts of wars. And so I know what I'm looking for. And this is why I've been so accurate, for instance, in Iraq and Afghanistan. It wasn't guesswork. I mean, some of it, of course, you're taking a chance when you make a prediction, but often I'm not actually predicting. For instance, the civil war in Iraq, when I was 1.5 years ahead of everybody, really. I think everybody. You'd have to check that out if you're so inclined. But and people were saying, oh, you're crazy, there's no civil war. And I'm like, well, I'm not really predicting it. I mean, I see it. It's physically happening in front of me on a daily basis. It was mostly Iraqis fighting Iraqis in some places like Bakuba, right? And so anyway, So I just know what to look for because I've studied these things so much. And so, of course, I didn't tout that because I'm not a general or a colonel or something like that, but I had studied it for years. And so I did have a good idea of what I was looking at. And so when Hong Kong hit the high mark with that 2 million protest back in June, that's when I was watching from my office in Thailand. And I said, good Lord, they're in general civil unrest. That's not protest. I mean, all the media is saying, the protests are getting bigger and the protests were getting bigger. I said, but those aren't really the protests that you had before. Now you've got general civil unrest, which is still often seen in the guise of protest, right? In protest, if you fix that one or two specific items, everybody calms down and goes home, right? I wonder if you can still hear me. But in general civil unrest, that's when people get angry at the government in general, call it incompetent, say they still think it's legitimate generally. The average person will still say, you're still legitimate, you're just incompetent. Great. All right. Thanks, everybody saying they can hear it. Thank you. And so they still want to keep their system of government generally. Most people in general, there's somebody that always wants to overthrow the government. We know that. There's always an Antifa everywhere, right? That's just part of life. But it's not like 50% of the people, right? It's some, fringe people or maybe leading edge people in some cases. So in general civil unrest, though, is when you get the mass of the people, like the average of the protest gets much higher. And also they can get much more intense. In other words, they can start throwing Molotov cocktails, or they can start doing, depending on the culture, they might do a lot of things. Like Iraqis, if this were Iraq right now, there'd be dead people everywhere. But since Hong Kongers are mostly very peaceful, or super, super peaceful, actually, then, we haven't seen, relatively speaking, very little violence, but it's a lot of violence in the context of Hong Kong. It's severely violent. In the context of Iraq, this is just like a weekend dust up, So general civil unrest is when the majority of the population across the spectrum of different professions and economic and often religious boundaries then join in telling the government you need to change, but they don't really necessarily want to overthrow the government. Then you come into the next phase. But when I saw this, the 1 and 2 million protest and other things, that's when I got on an airplane. I got on an airplane back here because this is when I got on the airplane and said, I am going to Hong Kong because they're in general civil unrest, and that's serious. That's something I need to go see because Hong Kong is vital, right? And so that's why I came in late June, and right on the leading edge of it, actually. So I was actually right to jump on the airplane because then on July 1st, I saw the first sign of an insurgency. The first sign that I saw of an insurgency was on July 1st, when so-called protesters at that point broke into the LegCo, the Legislative Council building, which is like their parliament or Capitol building. And so imagine somebody breaking into the U.S. Capitol. Imagine like protesters breaking into the American Capitol building. Think about that. Think about how many infantry troops and cops they would have to get through to do that. It would be like D-Day, right? So I was there when they did it here, and I was like, I can't believe they're doing this. How are they doing this? And there's no cops here shooting them down, Yeah, I'll get to insurgency, James. We're going to get to that. We're just about to get to insurgency. But on July 1st is when I saw the first definitive sign of insurgency when they broke into the LegCo, Legislative Council offices, and they didn't steal anything. They weren't doing anything like that. There was a lot of really like antique valuables there. They didn't steal. They didn't break those things. They did some spray painting, but it was over, like emblems and stuff. It wasn't over anything. It was nothing vital because they were quite civilized. In fact, there was a note up in there somewhere on like a refrigerator or something like that. Like, if you take a drink, pay for it, that sort of thing. That was a note from protesters to other protesters. So, you see them doing things, but they don't actually loot or anything. They don't run off with flat screen TVs or jewelry or something, and they very well could, but they don't. And because they do have very specific political points that they're trying to make. So that was the first sign I saw of insurgency was July 1st. And at first I thought it was a false flag, or maybe a false flag, because the police did not fight back and they just like left. And so that was July 1st. And then later I was sufficiently persuaded and convinced that that was actually protesters who did it. I was there inside with them when they did it. But anyway, and at this point, I'm all but positive it was protesters who did it. And then I saw other signs of insurgency, like shutting down the airports, shutting down roads, and we'll get into that. So in an insurgency, now remember, in protest, no, these are just normal protests. These are background noise that everybody's seen protest, and a lot of us have probably, every one of us has protested one way or another. You know what I mean? Whether it's at home or on a street, or because protesting is just part of life, you know. I mean, you don't necessarily go out there, you know, holding a flag or burning flags or whatever, but we all protest in one way or another if we got a pulse. And sorry, I had to drink some water. And so, but the protests are normal, so that's protest. And then we get into general civil unrest, where they still believe that they don't want to overthrow the government. They might want some parts of the government to change, but they don't want to throw the whole government out or drag, you know, politicians down the road or do assassinations or whatever. Except maybe, you know, if you're Iraqi, you would, or Afghan, you might. But in a country as civilized as this, you're not going to do that in this phase, right? Now, on July 1st, breaking of ledge coat. Now we get into insurgency. Insurgency. And then an insurgency, now it's the whole flavor has changed. This is a continuum, right? Now we've come to, hey, you know, the government's legitimate down here. Most people still think that, but they want some changes. Here it's like they want a lot of changes, and a lot of people want a lot of changes, but they still want to keep the government intact. With insurgency, now they're starting to say the government is not legitimate. Like here, the sixth demand, you keep hearing them say 5 demands, not one less. They've added one to it in the last week. 6 demands. They want the police to disperse. They want the police disbanded, which is not going to happen, right? But anyway, but that's, you know, whether or not they're serious. Well, I'm sure they're serious about it, but whether or not they're serious, they think they can pull it off. But most of the protesters seem to realize that's actually an unrealistic goal. You don't hear most people saying 6 demands, not one less. They stick to the 5. Universal suffrage, investigation of police brutality, stop characterizing these protests as riots because that has legal ramifications, rescind the extradition treaty and bill and that sort of thing. So those are the 5 demands. But now insurgency can be broken down into different intensities, right? So at this point in Hong Kong, we're about right here, and we've been here, we've been holding here since about early July, right? And now this is what, August, what is it? August 12th or something, August 11th, right? In Hong Kong, it's August 11th. So, I'm sorry, not August, but October. So, you know, since that time, we haven't really gone past this first part of insurgency. We'll call this category 1, right? Like a hurricane scale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. This is what this is. That's category 5, full-on kinetic war. Everybody's, you know, getting it like as much as they can get, like Dracula, or as they would say in Florida, getting it like Drac, right? Like Dracula getting blood. I mean, this is full-on combat. Everybody's giving everybody the best they can. But now in this stage, category 1, it can be not very violent. Like there is violence by the police, but nobody has been shot dead in the street. 2 people have been shot. An 18-year-old was shot in the chest. He's still alive. And a 14-year-old was shot in the leg. Now, a lot of people have been beat up right in front of me and gassed and that sort of thing. And there are allegations that 3 were killed in Prince Edward train station, like subway station. They call it MTR, on August 31st. And those are unproven to me, but there is something there because there's clearly a cover up. But anyway, the point is, it's not like there's hundreds dead. When I was in the Thailand fighting, covering that, there was a couple thousand casualties. I mean, it was straight up 100 times more violent than this. And so a lot of people don't realize that. They didn't realize how kinetic it was in 2010 and 14, which I was there for both of those. And so now let's go back to the 80s in Poland. And now in Poland got independence, and they stayed in this level of insurgency. They never really progressed to. They never really progressed into even into 2. They certainly didn't get into 5, and they ended up getting independence. That was, we're talking, Lech Walesa with the Solidarity movement and whatnot. And in fact, the United States, Reagan was president. We were supplying them copy machines. You may or may not have heard of the operations name, which was a QR helper. Anyway, that was the code name for the whole CIA thing. And when I was in Special Forces, we were actually training to infiltrate into Poland and wage guerrilla warfare in a place near a place called Białystok. But anyway, long story short, Poland, we supported a lot of their unions and whatnot, and they were doing strikes, and they were doing all kinds of economic damage and causing political heartache for the Soviet Union. And thanks, Keith, still 5 by. And that was 1 minute ago. Can you explain quickly insurgency? Yeah, okay. I hope I'm doing a good job for you, James. I'll keep going on that. And so, sorry, I just got a message from Prague right now. Let's see. And so, Poland and other East Bloc countries got their independence, and they stayed in this level of insurgency. It never progressed to here, and here, like Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and so many other places did. They stopped right here. Of course, in insurgency, we could talk about that for a long time as well. There was elements of civil war and all kinds of other things. So, but that's for a discussion for another time. But we in Poland, we supported the trade unions and other workers unions, which broadly came under Lech Walesa eventually, because he kind of organized things, and the Catholic Church helped out a lot as well. And then we undermined the United States and allies. We undermined the Soviet Union politically and economically. And so when you got all the Eastern Bloc countries, especially like Poland, just doing, have you ever been to Poland? I lived there for 2 years after I was out of the Army. Not a coincidence. And so I lived there for 2 years, and I talked with a lot of the resistance at that point, and I was learning lessons from them. And I was actually in business there, but, I kind of had a hobby of asking them what they did during the resistance, just want to know. And so, seeing as how it was up my target country, I never told them that, of course, because it was still classified at that time, but it's not anymore. But the point is that through resistance, we never armed the Polish. It was discussed, but we never did it. And the Polish did not want to use violence against the Soviet troops or their own army, because they thought, well, that would give the Soviets a reason to do a bloody crackdown, right? And they thought, and we thought, President Reagan thought. I mean, I was in my young 20s. I wasn't. All I was thinking about was parachuting in there and killing Russians. You know what I mean? I wasn't thinking on the strategic level. But our strategic thinkers did a very fine job, and they undermined the Soviet Union by using countries like Poland, who wanted to be free. So we supported them. And so we teamed up. We basically mobbed up and smashed the Soviet Union. It's a long story. It's really worth studying. But again, they stayed in this level of insurgency, undermining their governments. They wanted, in their insurgencies, they wanted to throw out their governments, and they wanted independence from. They wanted to get rid of communism, and they wanted to be shed of, using Southern talk, they wanted to be rid of the Soviet Union, and they accomplished it. And we accomplished it together. And again, never got to this point. So you heard me, or if you have been watching my Facebook, you may have seen the other day when I said, I mentioned stop throwing the Molotovs. I've got Poland and some other things in the back of my mind when I say that. It could, because if you get to a certain point, then people start getting killed here. Then it's very quick to go right to 5. I mean, once you break the ice on that, you can go bang, 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 and then it's fully kinetic. And PLA, the People's Liberation Army, comes in, and it's just terrible. And so keeping a lid on it and keeping it down here is a very good idea. And so no, it doesn't have it's not the right one, Web Lurker. It's not the right pin. See that? It's not my hotel. I would not be using my hotel pin. So, but thank you. but if you can keep it in this level, they in Hong Kong, they can still succeed. It takes patience. It took Poland most of the 80s, right? Well, it took longer than that if you really want to count back. But they succeeded, and now Poland is hard-headed Poland like they always are. I love Poland, and look at it's funny when Merkel and others are like, Poland, you need to take your fair share of the fair share. That's a funny term of the the illegal aliens or whatever you want to call them. And I'm like, listen, I lived in Poland for 2 years, and I love Polish. And let me tell you what. For the safety of those, whatever they are, as immigrants, do not try to put them in Poland like you do in Sweden or Germany or whatever, because if they come out and do what they do to, German women and Swedish women and all that, if they do that to Polish women, they won't be calling the cops, because the Polish men are still real men. They will absolutely kill them. They're totally tough. They're totally still a little feral. They're like, I like them. And so, anyway, that's a side topic. But Poland, with their stubbornness, their non-Newtonian personalities, they're free, and you can take a vacation there right now. Czechoslovakia, similar, different personalities. Well, Slovakia is totally different, but the Czech Republic, it's got a different personality, but also fairly, stubborn. Look at how Czechoslovakia just. Let's see what Eric just said. Would it be going to a higher level of? Would it be going to a higher level of violence? Have a stronger chance of igniting insurgencies in other places in reaction to the strength of the mainland's reaction? It could, but look what they've done to. Look what they've done to the Uyghurs. Now, the Uyghurs have fought back, for instance, in Kunming and other places, like when they hit that train station with the knife and sword attack. I think it was knife attacks, right? In fact, I stayed in a hotel that was right down from that train station when I went up there researching some stuff. And, the Uyghurs have done all kinds of quote-unquote terror attacks, which, others would call resistance attacks, because they are clearly being gobbled up by the Chinese. And so what about the Tibetans? You know what I mean? We actually armed the Tibetans. A lot of people don't realize that we armed a group in Tibet called the Kampas. And I first learned that in Nepal. I was up in Nepal. I spent a year in Nepal, and I was out with the Maoists a lot. I would listen to them, and it's something I've never written about, and I probably will never write more than a few paragraphs. But I spent a lot of time out with the Maoists, and I learned a lot about what their motivations were and what they were doing. And they, they were very violent. But when I was out in those areas was when I learned about the compass. I'd never heard of the compass before, and so this Nepalese actor, they were making a movie about him in this kind of remote village, and he said, "Yeah, the CIA and special forces trained the compass and they came from, they trained them back in America, and then they brought them to Nepal, and then they crossed the border into Tibet." And they were fighting, the Chinese army up there. And I was like, that guy didn't know who I was, and he didn't know this is kind of something I've studied for years. His name was Rajesh Hamel. He's very famous in Nepal. If you know Rajesh, tell him Mike said hi. You can find him on the internet. He's quite famous. He's like the John Wayne of Nepal. Anyway, so Rajesh was telling me about that, and I was just rubbing my chin like, I should have heard of that. So anyway, at one point I was back with a bunch of old SF guys and agency guys, and I asked them about that, and they're like, these are older guys, and they're like, oh yeah, I remember training those guys. We brought them up to Leadville. We had them in Colorado near Leadville. We were training them up there, And anyway, now it's Now it's kind of well known, but at the time I learned about it in 2002, it was pretty unknown. But yeah, so we trained them and armed them, and so there have been armed rebellions throughout fighting the Chinese. Doing a long way to answering your question, and it certainly can have some effect. Now, but with Hong Kong, I think, and I could hear, I was listening to Steve Bannon talk in one of his interviews yesterday, and stuff that he's told me on the phone too. He thinks they need to keep it right back here. You know what I mean? And I believe the same thing. Keep it back here. That's why you saw me just the other day say, I'd kind of stop doing those Molotovs, uh, because they're giving an excuse for, they're sooner or later, one of those Molotovs is going to land on a policeman's head, and he's going to be on fire running around, and he's going to die. And those policemen, what would happen if somebody set your buddy on fire? You know what I mean? My gun would be out in a second. You know what I'm saying? And so will theirs. And it's just a human thing, right? And then at that point, the PLA can say, you're out of control, and just come in and use those instances for as an excuse to crack down the way they've done with the Tibetans and the Uyghurs and the Falun Gong and everybody else they're stealing organs from. So, how's my audio? Is it still going? Let me answer any questions are up here. Let's see, Eric's, okay. Ewan Kitman said, Polish probably remember Hungary 1956, Czechoslovakia 68, so they feared Russian tanks, yeah. And 1956 and 1967, also better comparison for Hong Kong and Tiananmen Square. Oh, yeah, I actually agree. Yeah, actually, that would be something we could just talk about for like an hour, Actually, I wish we all had our own audio and we could just like take it around the table. When you got a small group like this, we could just talk, Let's see. Read the CIA. Okay. Eric said, I read about the CIA doing that and spoke to a lot of Tibetans who escaped Tibet. Oh, shoot. I hope I didn't lose your, no, there it is. All right. I thought I erased your comment or something. So Eric said, I read about the CIA doing that and spoke to a lot of Tibetans who escaped Tibet when I was living in MPLS and heard, it went up again, and heard stories of PLA using escaping Tibetans for sniper practice. I wouldn't doubt that. Audio is good to go. Keith, fine by. Good. All right. Are the police from Hong Kong or the mainland? Oh, Eric, that question, that comes up like every day. I heard somebody speaking Mandarin people. You'll hear people say that, because under stress, people revert to their native tongue often. Now, I don't speak Mandarin and I don't speak Cantonese. So to me, they're both Spanish. That's how a German would say, das ist mir Spanish. That's Spanish to me. And we'll say that's Chinese to me or something, right? Well, but they, good. No drop so far. So that tells us it could be actually Facebook doing it and not the iOS. I'll have to try another one on Facebook at another time and see. Let's see. But answering your question, are the police from Hong Kong or from the mainland? Certainly, they're supposed to be from Hong Kong. So yeah, and so that's where we go. If they can keep it in this range and keep a lid on it, and do what the Polish did and others in other insurgencies, which is just continue to throttle and nibble away at the credibility of the government. And at the same time, they're damaging China. And look what happened with Poland. Poland was inspirational. Of course, there's a lot more going on there, and people on my Facebook tend to be a fairly studied crowd, as you can see. So you'll know there was much more context. There was the war in Afghanistan, and there was all kinds of other things. But all of that taken together, we ended up basically cracking the Soviet Union, and then the next thing you know, the wall came down, and the rest is history, as it were. But yeah, they kept it to a low roar. We did not arm them. Lech Walesa and the others, to my knowledge, never asked for weapons. Nobody like Lech Walesa, to my knowledge. He was the main Polish leader who later became the leader of Poland, and then I think realized that the Peter principle, often the people that win the wars are not the people that really should run your country. We all know that, right? Uh, and so there's that inversion of a leadership that can occur. The people that are best leaders in peacetime might not be good to wartime leaders, and he seemed to realize that he was not a good peacetime leader, and he recused himself at one point. I'm not an expert on that, but others could say more. Any specific questions? We've accomplished my goal in seeing if this would last, and so we've gone for 40 minutes. And I will answer any questions that you've got before I'm actually got an interview tomorrow night from the streets as well. So actually, there'll probably be fighting, and so we've got to do a comms check for that interview tomorrow night. Any more questions? Thanks, James. These all fall under unconventional warfare, by the way. Insurgency is one form of that. There's three main aspects to what they want here. Let me get a piece of paper out here. Let's draw a Venn diagram. Will you be streaming from YouTube from now on? James asked. That's a good question. This is the answer as I know it at tonight. We are working. Just EOD friend just sent a message about the CS being shot here. We are working on a system that will stream to multiple platforms. So in other words, we can send it to. Thanks, Web Lurker. Yeah, by Causeway. Yeah, it was a few days ago, wasn't it? But so the first audio dropout. But yeah, we're working on a platform that will. It's already a program that will stream out to like three different platforms like YouTube and Facebook and Periscope, that sort of thing. And so but before we do that, we have a methodical plan. We're got a new camera that should have been in 2 days ago, but it should be in today, let's say. And that's going to have much higher resolution and capabilities than these phones. And then also a better streaming platform called LiveU Solo. LiveU Solo, if you can read that. LiveU Solo. And actually, you'll see it on a lot of people's backs. When I'm out, there's a little backpack. You'll see a lot of the people that have video cameras, and they'll have like a yellow cable coming to their camera. Often, if you look what's written on their backpack, it's like a small blue backpack. It'll be LiveU Solo. That LiveU Solo can have up to 4 SIM cards in it, right? Phone SIM cards, and then those are bonded together with some special magic software, and then you can use the bandwidth from those 4 chips. So then we can use that much better camera, an XA50. It's called an XA50 camera, and it'll be phenomenally better camera than these iPhones. And then we'll have more bandwidth, so you should have better audio and better video, and we should not have many dropouts at all. If there's a real dropout, it's probably because I got hit with a rubber bullet or something. You never know. But there was a couple more questions that I didn't answer yet. I agree, Sonny. Yeah, exactly. And Ewan Kitmoon, where are you at, Ewan? Ewan said solidarity took 10 years to free Poland. Can Hong Kong hold out that long? Well, that's something I ask myself every day. Because, Hong Kongers, they're like, New Yorkers, they want everything snappity snap right now. However, you can, because I'm constantly trying to sense that actually, and like everybody, like Americans, they want something yesterday, right? I mean, because people that get things done are people that get things done, and so but they're coming to the realization that it's not going to happen in 6 months. They realize that, and they're coming to the realization. Oh, you're in Singapore. I love Singapore. Actually, you know what? I hate to say this, but I actually like Hong Kong better than Singapore. I know there's always that big fight between Singapore and Hong Kong, but I like Singapore, but it's a little bit sterile compared to Hong Kong. But I love Singapore though. Um, but I checked. Web Lurker said I checked live stream it since October 8th. Causeway Bay. The audio stopped 11 minutes 37 seconds to 11 minutes 39 seconds each time. Well, what would be causing that? If it's happening to me, yeah, I thought you were Malaysian. I if that 11 minutes 38 second thing is happening to me, it must be happening to others. You know how that is. You're usually not the only one. But let's talk about the different faces of this fight. There, on the Venn diagram, there's going to be the way it's shaping up. The way I see it now is you got three main elements of it. One is independence, which they don't say. You may have seen Steve Bannon say on that interview that I posted today. If you watched it, it's worth watching. There's the independence people, actually, very few actually say it, and the ones who do say they want independence from China are considered kind of radical and scary and that sort of thing. In their heart, I think most people, I mean, it's obvious most people want it, but they're not saying it because a lot of them, first of all, think it's just impractical. They lack confidence that they can do it for various reasons. And of course, they would say that they're being practical and honest with themselves, which they could be. But remember, there was countries like Poland and Hungary and Romania and Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania. Look how big is Estonia? You know what I mean? You can actually put 5 Estonias in one of your pockets, right? I mean, Estonia is like the size of one of these neighborhoods over here, right? So in Hong Kong, and yet they're independent now because of the larger complex of things that happen. And the same can happen with Hong Kong. Anyway, one of the circles is independence. And overlapping on the Venn diagram here is internal revolution. Most people want, actually, it's probably, it's a huge, that's what, I'm not saying these circles are to spec, right? But that the ratios are right. But then there's the internal revolution, the people that want changes, either government members out, like Carrie Lam, who's you might say the mayor of Hong Kong. They call her the chief executive. And then there's others who want just changes within the government, so that universal suffrage, because they don't have an actual democracy here. It's just smoke and mirrors, and everybody knows it. This is a super intelligent population. And so they want an internal revolution, changes in the government, universal suffrage. They want big changes, and they want the police to be beholden to the people and not trying to master the people. And then every time you have one of these, a revolution or a call for independence, remember, that was us too, right? That was America. You always have, what's coming next, a civil war. Every time you do one of these, there's some element of civil war. It might be small, it might be big, right? And there will be that here too. And so you can already see very low hints of civil war here. You can see it in the news, or you can hear Hong Kongers talk about the triads and that sort of thing. There are different, the Fujians, and you can hear them talking about the internal. There's always going to be that. There's the pro-Beijing crowd, right? The pro-Beijing crowd, who are pro-Beijing or maybe anti both, they're going to end up fighting. They already are but on a very low level. For instance, you may have seen the taxi driver that drove into some protesters or patriots the other day. Those sorts of actions seem to be picking up. So, is there any other questions? I think we see that we can live stream for at least 49 minutes on YouTube. But a problem is nobody knows we're here. There's only 16 of us. So it's not like we're getting, sometimes some of those Facebook posts that I do will get, 50, 60, 70,000 views. And then we'll put them later on, they come up on different platforms and get even more. But is Taiwan involved with or providing support on any levels to the insurgents? Yes, definitely, 100%. for instance, in the form of gas masks and money. And they're like soulmates. I mean, that's a good question. I mean, Taiwan and Hong Kong, they're both facing the same wolf together, and they just generally get along with each other anyway. Uh, when you have a common enemy and you got along pretty good to begin with anyway, you make really quick friends. That's one thing about conflicts and wars I've been into. You always make super quick friends that you end up being friends for life. I've already made some friends here that I'll probably be friends for life with. Taiwan government, I don't know if the Taiwan government's doing anything. If they are, they're keeping the lid on that, I'm sure. But, a lot of people probably don't realize it. But the U.S. government gives training to the Taiwanese government. That's a fact of life. I don't know if that's public or not, but that's reality. And I'm all for it. Because to me, Taiwan is a separate country, and the United States needs to stand beside them. Of course, then we see what's happening with the Kurds right now. The problem is I don't trust the media, and I'm not there. So I don't, the Gelman amnesia effect is in play here. And so I wonder what's really going on with the Kurds. But certainly the Taiwanese and the Hong Kongers are looking at that because the United States, of course, has a history of either rightfully or wrongfully, when we get tired, we leave, of course. I think one of the problems that we've had in the past is building. You buy Taiwan military ammunition for training. Where are you, Sonny? By the way, the Hong Kong situation is very similar to Quebec separatism. They called it sovereignty association. Yeah, or how about Ireland or Scotland? How many of these are there? How about in Spain? The Basque and all that. How many separatists? Texas. That's not totally serious, but there's some in Hawaii, of course. There's always, that's normal. I mean, Texas, for instance, was separated from Mexico, and you probably know a little bit about that history. This separatist, the United States, my whole country is a separatist, right? We separated from the British and others. Any other questions? Anything you want to talk about? Otherwise, I'll go ahead and shut it off. And Florida Bro Wolf Gold 223. It's great ammo. Wow, from Taiwan? Did you say you get that from Taiwan? You mean they make Taiwan? They make it in Taiwan and ship it all the way to Florida? Wow, that's kind of weird. Wait, hold on. Let's be clear about that. Okay, Sonny, you're saying they make the ammunition in Taiwan and ship it all the way to Florida, and it's cheaper than American ammunition? I want to see what you say on that. That's really weird if it's true. Anyway, Web Lurker says Quebec is part of Canada, but they have their own consulates, legal, and education system. Canada pays Quebec $11 billion a year to stay in Canada. Maybe Hong Kong could bribe the CCP to let them go. Oh, dude, you know what they'd do. They're already doing it. No, they're not doing that. Well, CCP is basically, that's one of the points of contention here, is that they are that they're basically robbing, because this is a rich country in cash. I think they've got about $400 billion in relatively liquid foreign reserves. And China is trying to do all these they're doing, all kinds of like building infrastructure projects and bleeding that money off to China. So make sure to save the live stream when done. Some of us got the email really late and are 30 minutes behind. Okay, I will. Oh, that's another problem I had with those Facebooks that got cut off, by the way, the audio. I couldn't even save those. So the only videos I have are those low resolutions on the Facebook. And so when I cut this one off, I'll tell it to save. But Sonny says, yes, $280 for 1,000 rounds. You know what? When out in about 1984, I bought 1,000 rounds in Northern California, I think it was, like by Eureka or something. That's Northern California, right? I bought that for like 120 or 140 bucks or something. And that's California, man. And that was when I drove up the Yellowknife with a SF friend of mine, right? We just finished language school at DLI, Defense Language Institute. And we drove all the way to Yellowknife. Look where that's at on the map, man. That's like up where Santa Claus lives. And so when we came across the Canadian border, I had a 300 Weatherby or 300 Winchester Magnum rifle, right? You can kill a polar bear with that thing. And so and the Mountie, the border guy or whatever, he's like, "Got any firearms?" I'm like, "Yeah, I got this rifle." And he's like, "Oh, a nice rifle," you know what I mean? He just let me come in with it, like, because it was, pre all that terrorism stuff, and then we drove up to Yellowknife, which was, man, a long drive. Any other questions? Taxation without representation. Again, it sounds like, yeah. And I'll save that obsession of the month, whoever you be, with that moniker. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and shut off. And Kyle Bass says Hong Kong has spent most of their U.S. dollars defending their currency peg, running out of USD. He's better short. Hey, do you have a link to that, Ewan? I'd like to watch him. That's a smart dude, Kyle Bass. I'd like to see what he's saying. I'm jealous. Wish we could find ammo for those prices today. LOL. But thanks again, my friend. But think about it though. That is 1984 money. So maybe it is kind of like that price today. You know what I mean? How much has the inflation been since then? What's our annual average been since that time? And let's see. Thanks, Eric. I appreciate you. Excellent present. I appreciate it. And I hope that helps understand a little bit when I say what stages they're in. And so I just throw out these terms, GCU, General Civil Unrest, or Civil Unrest, what I'm talking about. And you still see protest here, during insurgency. But usually, actually, they can actually, like you've heard me say maybe on live feeds, that when they really have to worry is when all these really die down and there's no, but you know what I mean? Like there's really not any big protest on the streets, but they're still very active. That's when they've gone to ground, and, and things can get, so if, you see people already saying, well, it's been quiet these last 2 days, they must have given up. I'm like, oh no, that's not how this bear works. I've seen this in too many countries. It's like, no, the bear is just asleep. And it's going to wake up. Just because you don't see the bear out running around killing cows right now, you can rest assured it's going to wake up and be hungry. And so, but luckily they're extremely civilized here, extremely. So they've done cheetah backflips to avoid. They don't want to kill each other. That's very clear. I mean, they might want to, but they're too civilized to just do it. Hopefully, it stays that way. It helped a lot, and the biggest thing I was wondering about was this lead. Eric said it helped a lot, and the biggest thing I was wondering about what this will lead to. So it helped. Yeah, well, I mean, we don't know where it's going to lead to, and it's like a hurricane. You know what I mean? We can see it's formed. We know what it looks like. I mean, I know what a hurricane looks like because I've been in some of these conflicts. Wow. So Weblurker, $140 in $1985 is now $334. So he's actually getting it cheaper. So he's getting it for what he said, $280 or something like that, right? Or $240 or $280 or something. I think he said $280. Yeah. So, wow, so he's actually getting it. I mean, the $334 is kind of expensive. You think about it. You're shooting, that's 33.4 cents a shot, dude. That's adds up. Because I love to shoot when I've got my AR-15, man. I wear that thing out. Of course, I haven't shot it in forever. But anyway, if there's nothing else, look, we're going up on 58 minutes and 31 seconds and no audio dropouts. So there's a clue. Apparently, it's not the phone. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and cut it off, and I'm going to go ahead and save this. And next live feed, I don't know when it'll be, but it will be, let's see, what time is it? It's almost 4 o'clock in the morning here. It will be, I would say, within 12 hours, probably, depending on what's happening on the streets. Could be 8 hours, could be, I got one call to make when we get offline here, and then get some sleep, and then get ready. Yeah, Weblurker, I already deleted the the Facebook app. Corinda suggested I do that earlier. I did that, and then I did another live stream after I reinstalled it, and it still didn't work. So I don't know. It's a mystery. Thanks, James, and y'all have a good day. And my day is about to start, but I'm going to bed. See y'all soon. Bye. Are you sure you want to stop streaming?